Amid the bustle of students filling the classroom in white uniforms, a young man sat rigidly with his head bowed, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Around him, the faint sound of laughter and chatter was muffled by an inner noise only he could hear. A name, or perhaps just the shadow of someone, echoed so strongly in his mind that he began to doubt whether it was real. Another student glanced nervously at a friend, mentioning her with hesitation, as if realizing they were thinking about the same person. Meanwhile, the blond young man remained motionless, flipping open his textbook without reading, his fingers brushing the page while his eyes stared blankly. He tried to seem indifferent, but beneath the stillness, his thoughts were bound to one thing. Huh? From the upper floor window, a striking blonde girl stood defiantly, her bold outfit clashing with the conservative tone of her school. Her eyes, sharp yet detached, stared into the distance, unaffected by the murmurs coming from the adjacent building. A student from another school, neatly dressed and steeped in internal conflict, watched her with a mix of contempt and curiosity. She looked so stupid, he muttered inwardly, though his gaze refused to shift. There was something about her that disrupted his thoughts, a feeling he couldn't yet name. And when their eyes finally met across the glass, the wall of judgment between them began to crack. From behind the window, a group of boys fixated on the blonde girl with a mix of intrigue and mockery, tossing out jokes as if she were some curious attractions. One of them jokingly suggested shaking her hand, flashing a toothy grin that hoped for a reaction. But the girl didn't spare them more than a sidelong glance before turning away with a quiet scoff. "Is she ignoring me?" one of them muttered, both puzzled and slightly offended. Their reactions quickly turned sour, muttering sharp words under their breath, calling her a humble bitch, reducing her aloofness to arrogance. They mocked her, labeling her looks as merely passable and her attitude unfriendly. None of them realized, however, that her silence wasn't from stupidity or pride, but from exhaustion. She had seen these types of stares and heard these kinds of comments countless times. While they joked and scoffed from one side of the glass, she simply chose to retreat, preserving a distance that ran far deeper than they'd ever understand. Between the walls of two neighboring schools, one a prestigious preparatory academy, the other a looked-down-upon correspondence high school, lies a biting irony. From the windows of the elite institution, a group of students gazes out, spewing contempt thinly veiled as casual banter. They speak as if the fates of the students next door are already sealed, destined to fail, to live off wealthy men, and to be abandoned with age. There's envy in their tone, masked behind judgment, and a disturbing satisfaction in mocking what they don't understand. One boy's vulgar comments strip away any doubt about the malice in their words, reducing the girl to a caricature of shallow assumptions. Between their condescension and the silence of the other side, the stark divide of privilege is drawn clearly, two schools sharing the same sky, but never the same future. Amidst the cascade of lewd jokes and shallow taunts, one student finally speaks up, his voice calm yet cutting through the noise like a blade. He calls the earlier comment vulgar, his expression unamused and eyes sharp. The others freeze for a moment, uncomfortable in the face of unexpected defiance. One of them tries to laugh it off, mocking him with a childish nickname, but the short-haired boy doesn't flinch. He retorts with precision, pointing out the other's warped imagination. The air in the room shifts slightly, tension doesn't come from shouting, but from unspoken truths. In a classroom full of empty arrogance, one voice rings with substance, and that's enough to stir unease. After the sharp exchange earlier, the short-haired student falls silent. His expression remains composed, yet his mind churns with regret. Words like error, mistake, and the looming kanji for wrong seem etched across his face, symbols of doubt and internal rebuke. He mutters to himself that he said nothing, trying to dismiss the moment. Around him, his classmates laugh it off, treating the situation as a trivial outburst. But deep inside, he knows better, there are truths he has carefully hidden from them. The narration shifts, drawing attention to a dictionary definition printed in his open textbook, family, composed of close blood relations. A concept so simple, yet for him, strangely distant and hollow. As dusk settled over the city, he arrived at the towering apartment complex, his face worn from a long day. With a mechanical gesture, he pulled out his key and approached the door, just another moment in his daily cycle. The soft clink of the lock breaking echoed in the empty corridor. But as the door creaked open, he froze. Standing right there, in the doorway, was the same long-haired girl he had seen through the classroom window that morning. Their eyes met in a moment heavy with awkward recognition. In that instant, the wall between their separate lives, academic and personal, began to dissolve. The door swung open wide, revealing the confident figure of the girl bathed in the hallway light. She casually announced her return as if it were routine. Her younger brother stood frozen, attempting to break the tension by asking about her plans, only to be met with cold indifference and a mocking tone. She dismissed his concern with a sharp insult, barely acknowledging his presence. Her eyes held no warmth, just detached irritation. As she turned to leave, the emotional chasm between them widened, two siblings under one roof, yet seemingly from different worlds. Her piercing gaze demanded the truth, suspecting she had been the subject of the recent conversation. The younger brother, caught off guard, awkwardly denied it as mere small talk. As he attempted a polite farewell, her sharp retort lashed back with a humiliating jab. The word virgin hit him like a slap, leaving him speechless and stunned. While she walked away without looking back, he could only call out softly, unable to express the sting of her words or the silent frustration growing inside him. As the sister strode away with confident steps, her flowing hair swaying behind her, the brother's gaze caught something out of place, a glaring tag still hanging from her pants. Hesitantly, he pointed it out with quiet honesty, prompting a brief pause in her stride. Momentarily embarrassed by the oversight, she faltered slightly. In that fleeting moment, an odd dynamic unfolded between them, balancing on the line between sincere concern and distant awkwardness. The girl reached for the tag on her pants with a swift flick of her hand, her steps graceful and seemingly unfazed. Yet as she stared at the price label now in her grip, a flicker of embarrassment flashed through her otherwise composed demeanor. The boy watched from behind, his expression unreadable but his eyes reflecting a quiet bewilderment. In that fleeting silence, something unspoken passed between them, a wordless awareness of each other's presence, deeper than dared to admit aloud. The girl turned sharply, her eyes flaring with anger as she spat out the word gross, her fingers crushing the price tag she had just pulled. Without giving him a chance to respond, she spun around and stormed off, her steps echoing with contempt. From a distance, a cold whisper, "Die," lingered ominously in the air. The boy stood frozen, unable to process what just transpired. His face was a mix of confusion and blank disbelief. She walked briskly, her expression set in defiance, her long hair swaying with each determined step. Her eyes fixed forward, shutting out the world around her. Behind her, her younger brother followed quietly, still trying to process what had just happened. Whispers around school labeled her a loud gal, flashy, bold, and unreachable. But from the boy's closer view, the truth felt far more complicated than the rumors could ever explain. Behind her cold exterior, the girl seemed to take a deep breath, as though holding back emotions too complex to show. Meanwhile, her younger brother stared forward, his mind heavy with thoughts he never shared. They lived under the same roof, yet shared no blood relation. Still, something bound them together, something that outsiders might never understand. For them, family wasn't defined by genes or lineage, but by time spent and choices made. On a quiet afternoon, two boys sat cross-legged, working on their assignments in the living room. The soft scratching of pencils filled the stillness, while the clock read 5 o'clock. Yet time itself felt like it paused. One of them, with a calm but serious gaze, suddenly broke the silence with a question, "What does families mean to you?" A simple question, yet loaded with weight, it lingered in the air longer than any answer could. The question hung in the air for a moment before his friend calmly responded that family is just family, regardless of whether the relationship is good or bad. To him, what truly matters is how one feels. Tanuki sat quietly, contemplating, before finally nodding slightly, as if a simple truth had just settled in his heart. Perhaps to him, family was an important presence, even if he couldn't yet grasp its full meaning. His friend, sensing the depth of the moment but choosing to keep it light, asked curiously, was Tanuki worried about his sister? Lately, he had come to realize how little he understood his older sister. Every attempt to talk ended in a fight, and she only drifted further away. Even though they were family, the connection they once shared seemed more distant than ever. He stared ahead, troubled and unsure how to mend the rift. The weight of that realization pressed on him. Wasn't family supposed to be simpler? Before he could get lost in those thoughts, his friend interrupted gently, pointing his attention toward something else. Just as he was lost in thought, his friend suddenly broke the tension by flashing a phone screen in front of him, proudly announcing the release of Mr. Akebane's latest work, Let Me Understand. The contrast between the serious mood and the enthusiastic tone was jarring, leaving him stunned and unresponsive. His blank expression and slow, confused reaction only fueled his friend's disbelief. Unable to grasp how someone could miss such a release, his friend animatedly scolded him, oblivious to the emotional weight that still lingered in the room. With an exaggerated flair, his friend boldly proclaimed himself the Dojin master and began an impassioned explanation of the manga Let Me Understand. According to him, the story centered on a cheeky, confident girl who eventually concedes defeat, a dynamic he described with almost scholarly fervor. He watched this spectacle unfold in mild horror, overwhelmed by the intense enthusiasm and lack of shame. While internally questioning the appropriateness of reading such material at their age, his friend dismissed the concern with a smug remark, silencing him into awkward submission. His friend, now on a passionate high, continued preaching the meaning he found within the manga. He described the moment a proud, confident girl loses her pride and becomes unexpectedly honest and endearing, an event he seemed to view as near religious revelation. To him, this was the purest form of truth, something profoundly beautiful. Meanwhile, Tanuki sat there, utterly lost, his face reflecting deep confusion. When his friend insisted that the answer was obvious and right in front of him, Tanuki could only mutter, "I don't get it," showing that to him, everything still seemed hopelessly complicated. With unwavering confidence, his friend declared that the manga Let Me Understand could actually help Tanuki deal with his sister. To him, it was a universal remedy, a gospel of emotional understanding that could patch even the most broken of familial ties. But Tanuki's blank stare said it all. He was completely lost. When asked if he understood anything being said, he remained silent, eyes drifting aimlessly. His friend called his name again, hoping for acknowledgement. But Tanuki's only reply, laden with exhaustion, was, "My brain hurts." Evening settled in, and the warmth of a family dinner filled the air. Tanuki cheerfully complimented the food, saying it looked especially delicious today. His dad chuckled and replied that it always was, because their mom was just that good. The moment carried a gentle calm, washing away the earlier chaos and confusion. Just then, his father asked him to call his sister to the table. Tanuki, slightly surprised but compliant, nodded and responded, "Sure," before making his way toward his sister's room. Tanuki stood before his sister's room and gently knocked, calling out to let her know that dinner was ready. But silence greeted him. The lack of response made his expression dim with realization she wasn't home yet. Standing still in the hallway, his gaze turned distant and disappointed. The moment hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the warm atmosphere downstairs, emphasizing the growing distance of someone who was once an inseparable part of that family table. Just as Tanuki was about to leave, the door opened, revealing his sister in her striking appearance, weary yet defiant. He quickly called out to her, telling her that everyone was waiting. But she dismissed him curtly with a no thanks and turned away. Her expression, sharp yet unreadable, showed traces of tension. When Tanuki asked why she found his concern bothersome, she coldly replied, "Annoying." Despite that, he reached out with a memory, reminding her that they used to eat together. The sentiment hung in the air, briefly pausing her steps, but she said nothing more and continued walking. Tanuki called out sincerely, trying to close the growing distance between them, declaring that he cared because they were family. His words momentarily froze his sister in her tracks. She turned with trembling eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, with piercing force, she shouted that they were nothing. Her voice shattered the stillness around them, reverberating like a painful truth. Tanuki stood silent, stunned, his gaze fixed on her as if trying to grasp the weight of her words, his heart quietly aching behind a composed expression. Tanuki, surprised and concerned, asked if his sister was really going out dressed like that at this hour. But she replied sharply, her eyes defiant and unwavering, insisting she lives life her own way. She scolded him for the way he looked at her and threw in a cruel jab, leaving Tanuki speechless. He couldn't make sense of it, it hadn't always been like this. Confused and hurt, he wondered how their relationship had come to this point. His sister had become distant, rebellious, and filled with a kind of anger he couldn't reach. In the end, he could only bitterly acknowledge that she had turned into a cheeky, bratty girl he barely recognized anymore. As the door quietly clicked shut, Tanuki stood still, the weight of unspoken emotions heavy in his chest. He realized just how much had changed. His sister was no longer the warm presence she used to be. Her words, declaring she would live life her own way, still echoed in his mind. With a hollow gaze, he questioned whether this shift was her fault, or if there was something deeper, something neither of them understood yet. Remembering the phrase, "let me understand," a faint spark of resolve appeared within him. If he ever hoped to bridge the gap between them, he would have to begin by truly trying to understand her, not judge her. The chapter ends on this quiet determination, hinting that their journey is only just beginning.